Hey everybody, it's Bonkalina again, and this time I'm going to bring you a tutorial on creating a room mesh. I know you all been I've been salivating for it, so I'm going to try to do this, so bear with me. Um, First things first, you need to have your 3D application installed, and this tutorial will be based on 3ds Max version 2011. Yes, it's an old version because I'm unable to work with a new one. First things first, install the application, and then you need to install the plugin, the Cal3D plugin, so that you can take whatever it is you make in 3ds Max into IMVU. Without the plugin, you will not be able to export your wondrous works into the IMVU client because those files need to be in a particular format. So in order to do that, you want to go to the Creator dashboard and scroll down to the bottom, and you'll see it says Software Downloaders and Exporters. When you click on that, it's going to download something called an MSI file, which is a Microsoft installer file. And it'll install, it'll give you all the things that you need to get 3ds Max to be compatible with IMVU. So I'm going to assume that you've already downloaded that and installed it so that you now have in 3ds Max a file format consistent with what IMVU uses. So let's take a look. How do we know if it was done successfully? We'll go into 3ds Max, open it up. In this case, I've got some stuff open. But we'll go in and choose the file menu icon here and go down to Export and then Export here, which is a non-native format for the 3ds Max scene. So we'll click on that, and we'll see the export dialog, but we don't really care about that. What we want to see is down here. It says Save as Type. Let's hit that and see what we've got for file types available. And yes, we have Cal3D file types shown here. So we have the option to save files in these formats. And these are formats that IMVU recognizes. So you want to make sure that those are there. If they're not there, you do not have Cal3D installed or installed properly. So make sure that that is done before you get started, or otherwise it's heartbreaking and frustrating if you don't know where to look. So take a look and make sure that Cal3D is ready to go. All right. Now what you're looking at here is what are basically the minimum number of things that need to happen before you can create, in this case, a room. A little bit different. The only difference between a room and furniture is you don't need, there are certain things that you don't need for the furniture. And I have a dog moaning, so I'm going to pause here for a moment. Okay, now that we have the dispute over doggy beds settled, we can continue. So what I'm showing here is basically, with the exception of these statues, the bare minimum that needs to happen for you to be able to create a room for IMVU. So let's start from the beginning. I'm going to just take all this stuff out, and we can start. I'll leave the statues. The statues aren't a requirement. It's just pretty handy to use when you're making anything, because it gives you a sense of how what you're making is scaling to the size of the avatar. So it's not mandatory, but they happen to be there. Alright, so let's begin. What's first things first? Every object and room in IMVU needs to have a root. It's sort of an anchor for everything else that happens, or everything else with it. So let's get started with making the root. I'm going to assume that you've spent a little time getting familiar with the modifier panel, with the objects panel over here, so that you have an idea of where things are. A lot of the action is going to take place here, so you want to make sure that you're familiar with it. First things first, we have a little icon here that says helpers, and it's a little tape measure. So click on that, and then usually below that you're going to see a bunch of different options that are related to this selection. And in this case, a helper, and we're looking for a helper called dummy. And we're going to come over here and kind of eyeball it to put it in the middle. It's not obviously going to be in the middle, but we'll put it there. Doesn't have to be, doesn't matter how big or how small it is, it just matters whether or not you can see it and identify it easily, because this will be the root of your scene, or in this case, as a room, I'm going to call it, it's going to be the root of your scene. So now that we've got that drawn, which is just basically click and drag, I am going to position this close to center. I can eyeball it, but it's nice if it's precise. So what I'm going to do is come down here to the bottom.
I did not get that. Let me do a web search.
And now I've got my phone talking to me. Sorry guys, there's a lot going on here at Bonk Central. Alright, so what I'm going to do is center this in the absolute center of the space. And the best way to do that is we've got these three little windows down here at the bottom. And you see a little up and down arrow, a little scroll or doohickey that you can use to increment up or down. We don't care about that, but we do want to get over it and then right click. And see what happened? It zeroed out that value. And again, I'm going to do that on the y-axis value here, which says this is where it is precisely in the space. And I'm going to zero that out by right-clicking on the little scroller, or whatever those are called, those little arrows. Okay, so now we've got the root in dead center. Perfect. What's next? Well, IMVU requires every room to have 6 standing nodes, or 6 seats. If they're short, if you have 5, they're going to add 1. If you don't have any, they're going to add 6 in some random place of their choosing, and they may not be in an ideal place. So you want to make sure that first and foremost you have those required 6 nodes so they don't come in and rain on your parade. So again, we're going to click on dummy like we did for the root, click, drag, and make a box. Now usually I like to make the root the biggest box so that it's easy to spot, because in time you will see that you're going to be having a lot of these boxes to look at, and you want to make sure that you can spot, well, that's the root, well, that's a standing node, well, that's a furniture node. If they're different sizes, it's easier to identify them visually. So here we have something that's a little bit smaller, and now we're going to name it. And the naming, IMVU has naming conventions for these nodes, and for all nodes really, for furniture nodes, wall nodes, whatever, they all have specific names, or specific ways that they're named so that IMVU recognizes them. In this case, it's called a seat, and so we're going to start out with naming it seat dot or period, seat dot 01, what am I doing, dots, seat 01 dot standing. Sorry, I have distractions here, so it's kind of messing with me, but I want to have to keep recording this over and over again. Alright, seat 01 standing, that's our first seat. Now this says that this is going to be a standing spot for the avatar, which you're familiar with. I'm sure you've seen them millions of times, where the avatar just kind of stands there and goes through, cycles through their resident poses. But this is just a basic seat. It's not, there's nothing special about it. The avatar isn't going to do magical things. But they are going to have a place to stand, so we need that. Now we need to have 6 of these, because if we have fewer than 6, as I said, IMVU will add the difference to make sure that you have 6. So rather than let them decide, we're going to decide. So we're going to take this, and being selected, hold down the Shift key and drag it to the right. So what we're doing here is making a copy, and we have this little radio button selected, which is copy. Now we have to change the number or increment the number of the seats. The way 3ds Max increments things is different from the way IMVU decided to increment things, which is IMVU changes the seat number, and 3ds Max just increments a number on the end of the name. So what we're going to need to do is kind of clunky, but we're going to need to change the number of the seat to seat 2, and remove the 3-digit 001 that gets added by 3ds Max whenever we copy something. So let's just select that in backspace to get rid of it. So now I've got seat 02 standing, and we're going to select OK. There are easier way to rename things in bulk, but we're not going to get into that right now. Okay, so let's continue this process. Click and drag, and go to seat 3. Remove the 001 from the end, and continue. And seat 4. And 5. And finally, oops, seat 6. Okay, so now IMVU will be happy. We have 6 nodes in our for our scene, so we won't have to worry about IMVU throwing in some random standing pose somewhere. Okay, so there's our 6 nodes. What do we need to do next? Every room needs to have a camera, and the camera, you really don't have to worry about it too much, because the camera is basically just saying this is the starting point of where what the person who comes into the room is going to see. So it's not terribly complicated or scary. It's pretty straightforward. So what we're going to do is go up here to cameras, click on that little icon, and again we see that below some things have changed. And here we see that we have 2 options, which is target or free. I would use a target camera, and a bunch of options will pop up here, which I won't get into, but this is one of the ways that you can control the field of view of the camera, so that you're not able to move very far out from the scene. But that's not what we're going to get into here. All right, so let's just make the camera. We'll make the camera the same way. We'll click and drag. That'll pull the target out, which tells us what we're pointed at, and also allows us to adjust the view. Now, so I've got the camera there. I'm not going to worry about where it's positioned right now, because I haven't built the mesh yet, but I do like it to be out of the way, because I really don't need it. I won't need it for a while. So I'm going to pull it up in the space and pull it back, so that it's just not in the way, but it's still there when I need it. Alright, another thing about cameras is they have a very specific naming convention in IMVU. So you'll want to rename your camera, whoops, not with all caps, because there is case sensitivity. You want to name it camera .01, not 02, 01 .01 .root. Okay. Now what'll happen is the camera will be renamed, and so will this little square right here, which is the root target. which basically lets you control the camera and point it in different directions. Okay, so that's been attached. Now it's been named properly, so now I want to attach it like everything else to the root. So once again, I'm going to click on that chain link. Actually, I haven't done attaching, have I? Okay, let's back up. All right, so we've got that. We've got the camera. Let's wait on the attaching for a second. I got confused with the previous take. Okay, so we have our seats, we have our root, we have our camera. What else do we need? You could optionally add a light. You don't have to. IMVU will put in its standard light for you so that you don't have to specify it. There's a lot of subtleties about lighting. You can make your own lighting, or you can leave it up to IMVU to light the scene. When you make up your own lighting, you have less control over the lighting color, so it's kind of a back and forth thing. So for the sake of familiarizing you with lights and where to find them, you're going to go up here again, and now we've got this little light icon. So we're going to grab that, and there are two options that are going to show here, and possibly the first one you're going to see is photometric. IMVU doesn't support it. So use the drop down and go to standard. Okay. So now what we want to do is look at what our options are, and really, as far as I am aware, IMVU only supports Omni and Area Omni. So it's going to be either one of these two things, and they do behave a little bit differently in terms of the light being more isolated on the area than it is on Omni. Omni, as its name implies, is everything. So that light is going to hit everything. But for the sake of familiarity, let's just add a light. Okay? Now, one of the things that you may or may not experience is seeing the effect of this light in the scene. Up here again, this is part of 3ds Max 101 that you should be somewhat familiar with, is the ways in which you can view this scene. Smooth and highlights will show lighting and its effect on the surface. Flat will just basically make everything have the same amount of light, so that it's another way to look at things, but you won't see how the light's hitting it. Edged faces will show you the polys and the edges, and it also makes it really easy to figure out what you've got selected. And then we have lighting and shadows. Now this is something that if you're putting a light in the scene and you don't see any effect, you're either looking at it as flat, in which case you want to change it to smooth and highlights, or you have this illuminated with default lights. If I illuminate this scene with default lights, it's ignoring this light. It doesn't matter where this light is, it's not going to have any effect whatsoever. Let me take the edges off so you can see what I mean. So I'm moving this light around, and we're not seeing any changes at all to the way the avatars look. Now let's try illuminating with a scene light, which is the light I just put in. Now when I move it around, I'm going to see an effect on that avatar, or anything else really that's in the scene. So add a light if you must. You don't have to, but it can come in handy. So these are your basic ingredients for a room mesh. And what I typically like to do, or what my work habits have always been, is to create a starting point for rooms and a starting point for furniture, so that I don't have to keep doing this over and over again for every room or every piece of furniture that I create. Yeah, there are times when I have to add things or remove things, but for the most part, it gives me a place to start, so I don't have to do the repetitive parts. So this is my basic starting point for a room. But before I can do anything with this, I'm going to need to make sure that everything is connected, and this goes into the attachment that I had a brain fart about. So first, let's get the seats attached to the root. Everything needs to be attached to the root here. So I'm going to select all those seats, and up here in the upper left hand corner we can see a little thing that looks like a chain, and if you click on that, you can begin the linking process. Now there's two ways to do this. You can simply grab these items, because you see the little two squares there, and then drag it over to the root node. And when that root node turns white, that means it worked. Now let's take a look by going over to the Select Object mode. Press the letter H on your keyboard, and you'll see that you have your root node, which needs to be renamed, and your seats, and the seats fall under the root. Let me rename that so that it's clearer. Let's call that root. It does make it easier to identify rather than dummy 01. Okay, so again, let's look at that. We've got the root and we've got the seats attached. Perfect. The root is at the top of the hierarchy, and all of the seats are below it, so those seats are dependent upon the root being there. Now if I move the root, if I decide I want the root somewhere else, what's going to happen? It's going to move everything. And that can be fine if that's what you want. But if you've got these nodes placed in various places around a room and you're moving the root, guess what? Those places are going to move. So make sure that, excuse me, if you do need to move things and move the root, that you detach everything off of it. Now that doesn't mean that you can't move the seats. I can move the seats independently. They're not dependent on the root. In terms of position, they can be wherever. They just have to be associated with that root. So I've got the seats linked to the root. Now the next thing I need to do is link the light, if I've chosen to do it. And I'm going to do the same thing, select and link. Select and link, and I'm going to drag that over to the root. Now the other way that you can link is through using the detail screen as I showed. In this case, I'm going to use that for selecting the light. I don't have to. I can do it the same way. It's just I'm showing you a different way to do it. So I'm selecting the camera, and I'm going to press H to bring up this screen. Now this screen shows me a little plus sign which says you got stuff associated with this. So okay, that's fine. But I'm going to choose to link this camera to the root and click link. Now when I look at the root and everything off of it, I have the camera, I have the light, and I have the seats. And incidentally, with regards to the lights and naming conventions in general, IMVU has trouble with the 3-digit number at the end that is generated by 3ds Max. You do need to make sure that you remove the extra 0 on numbers under 100 so that it's a 2-digit number and not a 3-digit number. This is again part of the antiquated software that IMVU has created. So you want to make sure that you're using the double-digit instead of triple-digit numbers at the end of your anytime a number is incremented. Okay, so we have, just to review, we have our root, which is the basis of the entire mesh, and then we have the mandatory 6 seats that are associated with a mandatory room requirement. We have a light. We can use it, we can not use it, but it's there. And we have some statues that we've created previously to give us a sense of scale. So at this point, I would save it as what I call a room start. And what that lets me do is come in the future and start creating a room and not have to worry about putting all these things in. They're already there. So I'll save it as something else, and then I'll start building my mesh so that I don't have to keep reinventing this wheel every time. And that's pretty much it for your basic starting point. Mandatory must-have stuff. And then in another tutorial, we'll start getting into the mesh part of it. Okay? Thanks for listening. I will be back with more.